Something has just been published that is going to fundamentally change how you understand this entire saga. And I need you to hear every single word of what I am about to say, because this is not gossip from a corner of the internet. This is a meticulously researched book by one of Britain's most formidable investigative biographers. And the picture it paints of Harry and Meghan is more damning, more complete, and more heartbreaking than anything we have seen before. Tom Bower's Betrayal, published at the end of March and immediately #1 on Amazon, has done something rather remarkable. It has given us the clearest account yet of what actually happened to Prince Harry, the son of our king, who was once described by people who knew him as the jovial lad about town. And what happened to him, according to Bower's research, is not complicated. He gave himself away, not to a crown, not to a cause, but to one person. And to please that person, he dismantled nearly everything he had ever been. I want to be clear about what this book is and what it is not, because I believe in fairness, and that will not change regardless of the subject. Bower's claims are sourced and detailed, though, as with any biography of living people, they remain his account. Harry and Meghan have called the whole enterprise deranged conspiracy and melodrama, and their spokesperson was rather spirited about it. Here is the thing that I find most interesting about that response. When a book contains things that are genuinely false, you identify the falsehoods and correct them. You point to the page, you name the claim, and you demonstrate why it is wrong. What the Sussex statement did instead was attack the man who wrote it, his methodology, his stated opinions about the monarchy, his character. Page after page of detailed claims about specific meetings and specific conversations and specific financial figures. And what came back from Montecito was a dismissal of the general vibe of the project. That is not a rebuttal, that is a deflection. And this country is rather good at telling the two apart. And here is the entirely predictable consequence of that deflection. The book went straight to #1. Bower himself noted it cheerfully, pointing out that Robert Maxwell's legal campaign against him did wonders for his earlier sales. The Sussexes have done this repeatedly. They fired back at his first book, Revenge, and that sold. They have fired back at Betrayal, and that is selling. One could almost admire the consistency if it were not quite so baffling. When you brand something deranged conspiracy, you send an enormous number of curious people directly to the bookshop. That is not a communication strategy. That is the opposite of one. Now, the specific claims in this book are where my attention has settled most heavily, because some of them are not really about Meghan at all. They are about Harry. And what they describe is not the story of a man who made a choice. They describe the story of a man who was reshaped by someone else's choices, piece by piece, until the original had been replaced by something quite different. Bower writes, and these are his words, that to please Meghan, Harry was ignoring his old friends, that he changed his telephone number without telling his family, that his personality increasingly mirrored hers, that simple dislikes became passionate hatred. Sit with that last phrase for a proper moment. Simple dislikes became passionate hatred. That is not the description of a man growing in wisdom or finding himself. That is the description of a man being slowly calibrated toward extremes. The cheerful prince who loved his regiment, who turned up grinning at charity events, who was, by every contemporary account of that period, one of the warmest people in any room, became something harder, more reactive, more driven by grievance. And the only thing that changed was who he came home to. I am not saying Harry is a victim of anything, and I want to be precise about that because it matters. He is a grown man who made his choices and has the resources and the freedom to unmake them if he wishes. But I do think there is something deeply uncomfortable about watching a person's essential character dissolve under the influence of another person's ambitions. People who care for him, people who knew him well before all of this, have said quietly and privately for years that the Harry they knew is gone. Bauer has now put that observation into hardback. The Invictus Games revelations deserve particular attention because the Invictus Games are the project Harry built from nothing, the thing he created that was genuinely and entirely his own. A competition for wounded and injured servicemen and women that gave veterans a stage when the world had largely forgotten them. It is a genuinely good idea. It is, arguably, the most valuable thing he has done in his public life. And according to Bauer's account, it has been slowly transformed into something quite different. Insiders described Meghan's presence at the Games as bling, not rehabilitation. One former executive used those precise words: bling, not rehabilitation. The media coverage prioritized the couple over the competitors. Videos produced by Archwell emphasized Meghan's outfits and interactions rather than the veterans on the field. Some observers began calling it the Meghan Games. And the expenses, the private jets, and the security and the accommodation were described by those managing the event as exorbitant. An organization built by a prince in tribute to his fallen comrades was, if these accounts are true, becoming a vehicle for his wife's appetite for a global stage and genuine admiration. And I find that rather devastating, if one is being entirely honest. Because the veterans who compete in those games are not there for the cameras. They are there because the competition gives them something to train for and something to be proud of when ordinary life has handed them extraordinary difficulty. They are not a backdrop. They are the point. And the idea that the people running the event were concerned the sport and the athletes were being eclipsed by the couple is, if it is accurate, a serious thing. Not embarrassing, serious. There is also the matter of Sentebale, which Bauer examines in considerable detail. Harry founded Sentebale in 2006 to support children in Lesotho affected by the AIDS epidemic. He named it in memory of his mother and built it over nearly 2 decades. And then, rather than the story ending in triumph, it ended with Harry resigning in March of last year, along with the charity's co-founder, following a dispute with the chair, Sophie Chandorkar, that had become irreparably bitter. Chandorkar had commissioned a brand audit. The results were stark. Donors did not want to be associated with the Netflix shows, and specifically, as Bauer reports she told Harry directly, they especially did not want to be associated with Meghan. Several corporate sponsors had already withdrawn. Harry's response to being told this, according to the account, was to compare himself to Johnny Depp surviving his public difficulties with Amber Heard. One does not know quite where to begin with that particular analogy. What strikes me about the Sentebale collapse is that it was not caused by political opposition or press intrusion or any of the forces the Sussex narrative usually reaches for when things go wrong. It was caused, if these accounts hold, by the simple and rather brutal arithmetic of brand damage. The association with the Sussex media ventures had made the charity less attractive to serious donors. Harry's attempts to regain control failed, and he walked away from the organisation he had built to honour his mother's memory. That is a genuinely sad outcome, and it is not the press's fault. It is the consequence of choices made over several years about how to present themselves to the world. Choices that contaminated not just their commercial ventures, but their charitable ones too. The Kensington Palace confrontation Bauer describes is something I want to handle carefully, because it involves a private meeting between family members, and one should not treat it carelessly. Bauer writes that shortly after Harry and Meghan's honeymoon, a meeting took place at William and Catherine's apartment intended to reconcile the couples. Meghan told William, according to the account, to take his finger out of her face. Harry, apparently, watched. That is all I will say about the specific claims, because they are contested and the people present have not confirmed them. But the fact that such a meeting was needed at all, that within weeks of the wedding there was already a confrontation requiring intervention, tells you something about the speed at which the atmosphere deteriorated. The Fab Four, as they were rather sweetly called in those early months, lasted not even a year before the foundations cracked. What this book also reveals, and this is the part that gives me the most pause, is the architecture of what Bauer believes Meghan and Harry are planning next. The 2027 Invictus Games are coming to Birmingham, and according to Bauer, the couple are hoping to use that occasion as a platform, hoping that Harry's father, our king, will open the event and that it will create a prominent public moment for the whole family, including Meghan and the children. They are, in other words, apparently angling to use the thing Harry built for veterans as a potential vehicle for a family reunion that also happens to put them in front of the cameras again. Whether that plan comes to anything is impossible to say, but the fact that Birmingham's Invictus Games is already being discussed in these terms as a potential strategic move in the long chess game between the Sussexes and the Palace rather reveals how completely everything has been folded into the Sussex calculus. Even the veterans, even the games, even what might otherwise be a genuinely moving moment of reconciliation between a father and a son. Harry is 41 years old. He is a husband and a father and the son of the King of England. He was shaped by this country, by its military traditions, by the regiment he served with in Afghanistan, by the institution he was born into, and that gave him the privileges he still carries in his name and his title. Britain did not stop loving him when he left. It grieved him, if anything, the way one grieves someone who has gone somewhere one cannot follow. The door has remained open in ways that have required considerable patience from the people keeping it ajar. And what Bauer's book asks, without quite saying it in so many words, is whether the man who walks back through that door will be recognizably the same one who left. Whether the telephone number changing and the friend cutting and the grievance mirroring and the years of managed conflict have left enough of the original Harry intact to rebuild something real. That is not a question Bauer can answer. It is not a question I can answer. It is the question that sits at the heart of this story, quietly and rather stubbornly, waiting for someone to address it honestly. Our royal family gets on with what it does, which is to serve and to endure and to be present in the cold and the ordinary and the genuinely important moments of British life. It does not require any of this to validate itself. It never has. But it does, I suspect, keep a particular chair at a particular table quietly and patiently empty for a man who was once, by all accounts, rather wonderful to be around. Britain remembers him. It rather hopes he remembers himself.